Right now, let's introduce our panelists. Dewey is sitting to my right. He was born in Kitty Hawk and he fishes out of Wanchese. He is a dedicated spokesperson for the commercial fishing industry, and he serves on the Federal Fisheries Management Council. In 2012, he received the Highliners Award from National Fisherman Magazine for his advocacy work. He visits classrooms here in Dare County, but also as far away as Minnesota and New York, to teach children about commercial fishing and about healthy oceans. In 2015, he received the Pelican Award for his volunteer work with the North Carolina Coastal Federation. Please welcome Dewey to Hatteras Village. Next in line is Ryan Speckman. Ryan started Local Seafood in 2010 with his friend Lynn Peterson and a cooler full of Stumpy Point shrimp and a pickup truck. Local Seafood is dedicated to delivering the freshest possible seafood from North Carolina fishermen to the Research Triangle area. The business has come a long way since 2010, and Ryan and Lynn share their knowledge and passion for North Carolina seafood at festivals and forums around our state. Please welcome Ryan. Next, Elizabeth Wiegand is the author of 2 regional cookbooks, the Outer Banks Cookbook and the new Blue Ridge Cookbook. She believes that behind every bite of good food is a good story. Her work showcases the state's culinary treasures, and she is a strong advocate for local North Carolina seafood and North Carolina fishing communities. Please welcome Elizabeth. Finally, Seth Foutz is executive chef at Ketch 55 Seafood Grill in Avon. In 2012 and in 2014, he created the winning dishes at the Day at the Docks Seafood Throwdown. His culinary skills were featured in a 2015 Outer Banks magazine article about cooking with Cape Shark, which here we call that dogfish. His philosophy is that a plate of food, whether simple or fancy, should be creative and use the fresh bounty from the sea and the land. Please welcome Seth. So we're going to jump right into things, and Dewey, you're first up. Can you tell us a little bit about the types of fishing you do and about your boat?
Thank you, and thank y'all for coming tonight. I'm an owner-operator of a 42-foot fishing boat, and throughout the year, we do about 6 or 7 different types of fisheries. I fish under, to give you probably most of y'all a good perspective of, we have to have permits to fish. I fish under the State of North Carolina, Atlantic States Marine Fishery Commission, the South Atlantic Council, the Mid-Atlantic Council, and National Marine Fishery Service. So you have 5 governing bodies that we have to fish under to do my livelihood. And we pelagic longline fish, we gill net fish, we hook and line fish, we'll catch tuna, swordfish, mahi, bottom fish, we gill net for bluefish, croakers, spiny dogfish, Cape Shark, smooth dogfish, and that's just a few of the species that I fish under or that I catch throughout the year. And it's difficult when you try to fish under 4 or 5 different agencies, and so that's a task in itself.
Can you give us an idea of what you like best about commercial fishing and why you continue to make that your career?
As I'm smiling when I first got into it is because there was no 2 days, well, still no 2 days the same. As now, as it gets a little bit difficult, it's just the freedom. Something about a commercial fishing. We're given access to that resource that's owned by all Americans, not the wealthy, not the poorest, but all Americans, and we're given access to that resource. And so a lot of people aren't able to go fishing because of different reasons. So probably the sum it up is given access to that resource that's owned by all, and you know, we're blessed here in North Carolina with just our fisheries. So that's probably one of my favorite thing, and the reason why I like to do it.
Okay, here's a good question. What are some things about commercial fishing that might surprise seafood consumers?
Probably one of the major thing is the amount of regulations that we go through to give you that piece of fish that's on your plate or give you access to it. I don't think, you know, when you go to talk about, I like to talk about the nitty-gritty of what it takes to produce that seafood. And so therefore I think the public would be amazing to know the different things that I have aboard my boat, whether it's a vessel monitoring system, whether it's video cameras, whether it's filling out 8 different paper log books of what I go to give my accountability of what I do in providing the resource to the consumer. So I think that would be very amazing if they ever come aboard my boat and had a chance to look at that and just really take it in all, to know that that piece of fish that they ate had these many regulations associated with it.
Government agencies and a lot of organizations issue a lot of news releases and stories that mention overfishing. You're heavily involved in the regulatory process as a council member and as an advisor to other councils. Could you explain in layman's terms what overfishing means?
Overfishing means, the definition is that a stock can only produce so much, and you're taking more out of the stock that allows it not to reproduce at a sustainable level. So that's the definition as I see it for overfishing. It might be not the correct terminology, but you're overfishing the stock. Something to add to that is in the Magnuson-Stevenson Act is kind of like the law of the land with the federals. It's the every 4 years it gets reauthorized, 4 to 6 years. And in 2006, we had to end overfishing if overfishing was occurring. And within 2 years, you had to have a management plan into effect. And so with the majority of our federal fisheries, we have annual catch limits. So that means when you catch a certain amount of fish, you're done fishing. So to expand on, you know, Susan's question about the definition of overfishing, that's what that sums up, is you're taking out more than will allow the stock to reproduce. And if we don't have a stock out there, we don't have fish.
On a little bit lighter note, do you have a favorite seafood?
I get asked that all the time, and I don't have a favorite seafood. I mean, it's, you know, sometimes when I go in the fish house, I look and there could be 20 different species that's just been caught that day. And anywhere from a fried sea mullet to a piece of sea bass to a piece of mahi or crab meat that's just been picked, I mean, or shrimp that just come across the dock. We're just lucky. So I don't have a favorite. I mean, I love to eat, so I don't have a favorite piece of seafood.
Thank you, Dewey. Ryan, can you tell us a little bit about the origins of local seafood? We're really curious about how you and Lynn came up with the idea. Did you weigh the risks, or did you just say, hey, we're going to do this? And what was the initial business model that you envisioned?
Yeah, so Lynn and I were college buddies. We're both natural resource people. We graduated with a fisheries and wildlife degree from North Carolina State University. And when I graduated, I pursued a job as a endangered species biologist, and I worked in Terrell County and specifically, and also in Dare County, and then of course throughout the southeast. But I was based in Terrell County, and I was there for 8 years, and was kind of immersed in the commercial fishing industry just by default because a lot of my good buddies were commercial fishermen, and I grew up inland. I was a city boy. Not by heart, but that's where I grew up, and in Charlotte, and I never really experienced fresh seafood. And when I got that first fresh live soft shell crab in my mouth, I realized this is what seafood's all about. And I had buddies that were catching fish, bringing it back to the house. We get some beer, and it was just amazing to me. So I realized this is what people are get excited about with seafood. And when I moved back to Raleigh, it's only 2.5 hours away, 3 hours away, depending on what part of the coast you're going to. And I realized there wasn't really good selection of locally caught fish. I mean, I'm still friends with my commercial fishing buddies, and I know what they're catching, and you're not seeing that stuff in the Triangle, or further inland for that matter. And so Lynn and I just thought, hey, let's just give this thing a shot on the weekends. We'll sell some shrimp out of the back of the truck. My buddy Luke Midget catches shrimp out of Stumpy Point. We'll grab some of his stuff and just give it a shot. And 5 years ago, that's what we were doing. Just two guys sitting on the side of the road, and it just kind of morphed. It grew, I guess, rapidly, but it kind of we got invited to sell seafood at a farmer's market, and then it was another farmer's market, then it was 10 farmer's markets, and we had a really good time. I finally decided that there was enough, I guess there was enough future with it that I could quit my full-time job. Then my business partner, Lynn, quit his full-time job. But we still joke to this day that we could not have done this if our wives didn't have good jobs. Yeah. So that's true. So we didn't struggle, but I mean, it was we weren't making a lot of money, but we realized there was a potential for this, and we began to sell to restaurants. And our business model really was to, and this is going to sound terrible at first, but we were going to cut out the middleman. We're going to go straight to the fishermen that we knew and cut out the fish houses and be able to get a better margin and sell at farmers markets. But as we got into the industry, we realized that was not a good model because the fish house is such an important part of the seafood industry. They provide a lot of services to the fishermen, ice, fuel, dock space, information about what's in season and what's been shut down. So we began to develop relationships with the fish houses and fishermen too, but it wasn't, we realized pretty early in the get-go that we didn't need to be cutting out the fish houses.
And so what is your business model like now? Do you still do farmers markets? And you mentioned something about restaurants.
Yeah, so like I said, we started out pretty much, strictly retail. And as we kind of got a name out there, a few chefs called us. They were not happy with the product they were getting from the local distributors, and we got our foot in the door with a couple of restaurants, and then kind of word spread. And I mean, we really haven't marketed ourselves to restaurants, but now our business is about, our sales are about 90%. The volume is about 90% to restaurants, and also the Whole Foods grocery stores in the Triangle. And we still maintain 3 farmers markets on the weekends, but it's really more a wholesale business now.
I mean, working with restaurants, do you sell types of fish that those of us who live on the coast might be aware of, know, and like, but maybe those species aren't real well known to consumers in the Research Triangle area? And if you do, how do you encourage chefs and consumers to try new species?
Yeah, that was probably one of the hardest things, because what you realize, if you're getting, so we're focused on fresh fish that's actually being caught. We move it very fast within a 2-day period. We're not selling frozen product, frozen fish. We're going to the coast multiple times a week getting this fish. So you're getting the fish that's actually being caught. So it might not always be flounder, mahi, and tuna that everybody's familiar with, right? It's sheep's head, dogfish, ribbon fish. I mean, there's things out there. So we had to really, if we're gonna stick to our guns on getting fresh product, we had to educate the consumer about these different species of fish that a lot of you guys are familiar with down here, but most people inland have no idea what it is. So the key component or the key part there is to educate the consumer, and you have to you get a small window in a retail setting. You only have about 30 seconds to convince somebody to get ribbon fish. But if you tell them what it tastes like and what it's kind of like and how to cook it, a lot of people will walk out of there and they'll, 9 times out of 10 they're going to come back and get it if you give them good information. Chefs are a little different. They have a little more knowledge base. They're more flexible in general, and they'll take a risk on something they've never heard of.
Do you think seafood consumers are becoming better educated about seafood and about some of the issues that our oceans and sounds face? And what type of questions do consumers usually ask you when they're buying seafood?
I mean, I hope that local seafood is making a difference, at least in the Triangle and with our customer base. But I would say in general, the answer to the first question is no. I think it's getting more and more difficult. There's a lot of misinformation out there to people. They're not really aware, like what Dewey is saying, is really how much regulation and management there is on our fisheries. I just think people, there's just a lot of things out there. Like, for instance, there's like a lot of apps on your phone that you can look. It's like Seafood Watch, for instance. And people use that a lot, and they'll look at it and they'll say, well, this fish is not, I'm not supposed to eat this fish because it's not caught the correct way. But if you look at it, it's talking about a fish, maybe it's the same species, but it's in the Gulf of Mexico. It's not on the Mid-Atlantic. There's a lot of confusion out there. So I think for us, as our company, we're really educators first, and then seafood distributors and processors second. We have to tell these folks what's really happening, and we try our best to do that. What was the second part of the question?
What type of questions consumers ask?
Probably the number one question is, how do I cook it? That's what you get, and I try to keep it very simple because people are busy and they want something that's easy. So, 90% of the time I tell people all you need is olive oil, salt, and pepper, and you can cook just about any seafood. But the other thing is maybe mercury. Which fish are high in mercury, or we'll get a lot like how was this fish caught, or where did it come from. And then also, like I was saying, with these species that they're not very familiar with, like a sheep's head. I mean, people say, well, what is it like? What does it taste like?
Do you have a favorite local seafood?
Yeah, like Dewey, that's kind of splitting hairs, but is it Alaskan salmon? I would say cobia is probably my number one fish, and clams. I love clams. My wife and I eat them about every week.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Elizabeth Wiegand. Elizabeth, given that you have written 2 regional cookbooks, one about the Blue Ridge area and the other about the Outer Banks, can you talk to us about your connection to those areas? And something that I'm curious about, do you notice any similarities between the people of the mountains and the coast through their recipes, through what they like to eat?
Good question. Well, I'm all about local food, and I'm a farmer's daughter, a tobacco farmer's daughter. But when we were first married, we spent a lot of time at the coast, and so we fished a lot. And I learned how to love seafood, and I just adore seafood. And you're asking me the regions about the Outer Banks and the Blue Ridge. Well, both are small ventures. And farmers and fishermen are very much alike. I grew up on a farm. I know it's hard to make a living, and you're providing a product for people, and you've got to sell it, and you've got to grow it, or you've got to bring it in, and it's difficult, and it's hard work, and I admire and respect that. And there's a respect for the food itself, I think, with both communities, in the mountains and on the coast. But beyond that are the traditions and the stories behind the foods, and the family stories, and years and years and years of doing things a certain way. But then we've got a new way of doing things, and they can grasp that and try it, like when they're influenced by chefs like Seth. So yeah. You asked me, is that answering your question?
Yeah. Do you have any a favorite story you'd like to tell about in your efforts to gather these traditional recipes? Do you have a local food story you'd like to share?
Oh, I have a whole lot of local food stories I could share with you. But I think some of the ones that I appreciated the most were visiting with home cooks, men and women, who were in their 90s and who have since passed on and have shared with me at the time their traditional recipes for fish cakes, or for that we don't usually see everywhere, or for fish stew. Up in the mountains, a dear farmer who had been a tobacco farmer and used chemicals for like 35 years, and then the organic movement came in, and the tobacco money was running out, and he switched over in his 60s or maybe early 70s, and switched over and stayed with that land until he got it to be organic, and it became a magnet for other young people coming in to farm. And he said, "Have you ever had kohlrabi?" And I said, "No." And he taught me how to eat it and how to cook it, and he loved it. And it was something brand new to him too, and he was still learning. And I love that about the embracing the new and yet remembering the old and all the traditions and the stories behind it.
Do people ever refuse to give up their secret recipe?
You know, I can sweet talk about just about anything out of anybody, but there have been a few that would not give it to me. However, let me tell you this. In the Outer Banks cookbook is a recipe for the tiny layer cake that's usually 16 layers. And I was told up in the Mania area that you're not ready to be married until you've mastered this cake. And so in testing the recipe several times, I had more chocolate in my hair and on me and in my kitchen than I think I had on that cake. Anyway, Martha Stewart came to town maybe 3 or 4 years before I started on this project, and she was doing a thing about the Outer Banks, and she tried to get that recipe, and she couldn't get it. But I got it.
All right.
Yep.
Great. So you are on the NC Ketch Board of Directors, correct?
I just joined. Yes.
Congratulations.
I know, it's a big responsibility.
Yeah. So do you feel like demand is growing for local seafood, A, and B, do you have an idea of some of the challenges out there in trying to meet that demand?
Well, it is. I think the demand for local seafood is growing. I think people are trying to be a little bit more aware of where their food is coming from. I know there's certain communities within the Raleigh-Durham, Chapel Hill area. There are a lot of people who are aware and who want to do the right thing and buy the local food and that's grown sustainable, and the seafood that's caught sustainable. But then there's a lot of people who just don't know. And I feel like it's my job as a writer and a journalist, and also our board, is to let people know about. We have a treasure here in North Carolina, in our coastal waters and in our mountains and everywhere. I went to France to cooking school for a short amount of time, and I kept getting struck by, well, these are our local treasures, and these are local treasures, and I was thinking, my heavens, we've got wonderful stuff in North Carolina. And I had the good pleasure of meeting Julia Child, and I had this discussion with her. She said, "You must let people know about your treasures there, because we do." And our blue crab meat here, and all these ribbon fish and the other fish, they're delicacies. They're things that you could serve them in the finest Parisian restaurants, and people would be more than delighted. Yeah.
Okay, so what is your favorite seafood?
By far, that's like asking which one's your favorite kid, but by far, crabs, and especially soft-shell crabs. And one of the things that tickled me about when I was learning about crabs and soft-shell crabs, and in writing about them, I've learned about the sex life of crabs, and I've talked with a young man down in Mania who must have been so tired after staying up all night with the shedding crabs, and he said, "Well, you just have to wait until you can rub them, and they feel like a silk slip." And he's this big, burly guy. And how do you know what a silk slip feels like? Anyway, you have a good time with it.
Wow, who knew?
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you. Seth, we talked about earlier something called Cape Shark.
Yes,
Are you
did.
responsible for that name?
No,
Did you come up with that?
I had nothing to do with the shark, just the recipes.
Okay, well, so when you feature a less known type of seafood on the menu. Like we're talking about dogfish right now, which is apparently rebranded. This is new to me. This is great. It's Cape Shark. How do you encourage customers to try something new? And do you pair it with something familiar, or do you tell them how do you convince them to try something like that?
I go about it in multiple different ways, but the first and foremost is education, is to inform my servers, who are the ones selling the product, the fish, to our clients in the restaurant, inform them of what the fish is, what type of water it comes from, what it eats on, how it was caught, and if I can, which normally I'm able to do this, I let them know what captain caught it. And for people to understand that this actually is coming right out of the water from a captain here on the island, they're going to try it.
Yeah.
But then with setting up the plate for it, I do try, and if it's something kind of outlandish that people haven't heard of, I always try to set it up with something that they're familiar with. So, all right, I haven't had this piece of protein, being the fish or whatever it may be, but I'm familiar with the setup. So let's take a little bit of a gamble here. Instead of a full all-in, show your cards, we'll do a little gamble.
Yeah.
And then that gets them in, and then half the time they come back to try something even a little more outlandish by doing that and educating. I want people to leave the restaurant with not just a full belly, but with a new piece of knowledge and a new flavor in their mouth that they haven't had before.
So what are some of the more unusual types of seafood you've served?
Cape Shark's one of the good ones.
Yeah.
Escalar, it's a bycatch. It's a deep water fish that's in the tuna family. In China, it was called the forbidden fish because it's actually the oil that's in the meat is, our bodies don't break the oil down, but if you serve under 8 ounces, your body accepts it no problem, and it's an amazing fish. And we've had great success with it. And I'm the only only person that buys it because I know how to, use it properly.
That's great.
It's fun.
So are there challenges in trying to source these
Absolutely.
seafoods, unusual seafoods?
Well, so much of the challenge is the regulations that the government's put on the local captains and fishermen. They make it almost impossible to feed their families. For me to have to buy through Cisco to get fish that's caught here, that's ridiculous.
You have to do that?
Sometimes, yeah, because it's just the regulations and the way things go. It's almost impossible for me to be able to buy straight from a captain because of the regulations that are set upon them. It's government hand.
Yeah. Yeah, that's ridiculous to have to go through Cisco.
Yeah, living on a sandbar.
That makes me mad. So what sort of questions do Catch 55 guests ask about when they're looking at the menu and they're trying to figure out seafood? They're not sure. What do they ask you?
A lot of times what the flavor profile of fish is. So you have to have an idea. Tell them it tastes like chicken.
That's all I need to hear, right?
No, but again, it goes back to education for my servers, to understand, and that's every night I put out the special for them to eat. So they have the flavor in their mouth, they feel the texture, they have the taste, they see the presentation. That way they can explain and pass along the knowledge to the guests, So again, the guests are going to be more likely to stand out and try something different instead of, I'll just have the shrimp and grits. Hey, step out and try something new. Mm-hmm. You can come back. That's always here.
Yeah. So we always hear this emphasis on fresh seafood, fresh seafood, fresh seafood. Is frozen always a bad thing?
Frozen is not always a bad thing because of seasons. You're not going to get a fresh watermelon grown in North Carolina in the middle of December. All fish, all food has seasons to it. And with the new methods of freezing, IQF, instant quick frozen, it's all protein. We all know we're all made mostly of water. Water expands when you freeze it. If you freeze water fast enough, it doesn't have time to expand, and that's what this instant quick frozen is. When it's negative 30, 40 degrees, the water molecules don't have time to expand and blow the protein apart, being the fish, which means it is immediately frozen and it's not separated out like everyone thinks of as frozen protein out of your freezer. You can tell it's been frozen. Well, with the new freezing methods now, that's not necessarily the case, and then you slack it out properly, you've got a beautiful piece of fish, and you're still buying from a North Carolina fisherman, in the middle of out of season. You know, instead of saying, "Oh, I'll take some, you know, fresh stuff from California." Yeah, how fresh is that?
Yeah, right.
You know, to me is I would much rather buy IQF frozen shrimp from North Carolina than send my money to Ecuador. You know, to me, it's all about keeping the money in our economy because it is so very difficult. The government has made it almost impossible for a fisherman to make a living and put his kids through college. So the more we can do to keep that money in our system, the better we can do. And freezing is not a bad technique if it's done properly.
Are there any seafood types that don't freeze as well?
There are some, yeah. Salmon, for one, it freezes well, but again, it's not a North Carolina thing, so we don't need to discuss it.
That's right. I'm going to talk about that. All right.
But all in all, really, like you said, with these blast freezers, I mean, literally you can freeze a piece of fish, an 8-ounce portion of fish in 4 minutes. Water doesn't have time to expand that fast. So you've got a beautiful piece of fish that was caught, yes, maybe it was caught in June, and you're eating it in December, but it was frozen properly, stored properly, and slacked out properly. Money's still staying in North Carolina economy. Fishermen are still able to sell everything they're catching, you know, instead of having to throw away because they didn't sell it fresh.
Do you call that fresh frozen?
It is, yeah. You know, a lot of people, you know, kind of laugh at that statement, fresh frozen, but it's the truth. You know, with the blast freezers the way they are now, it is the truth. It's fresh frozen. You treat it properly, you're not going to know the difference. I could put a shrimp that was caught this morning to a shrimp that was frozen this morning last year that was slacked out, frozen properly and slacked out properly, and you can close your eyes and not know the difference.
What do you mean by slacked out?
Slacked out is not running it underwater, letting it sit in the refrigerator and slowly defrosting. If you quick defrost something, it's just like slow freezing something. It's going to ruin the properties of the protein. So slacking out is just a method of defrosting where, all right, so you want to eat shrimp tomorrow night, you don't pull it out at 5 o'clock tomorrow, you pull it out at 5 o'clock today and let it slack out. You know, don't run fresh water over it. Don't wash that salt water flavor off of it.
Yeah. I'm learning all kinds of things I've been doing wrong. Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks, y'all. We have one other question, and most of you have hit on this topic in your comments about the confusion that seafood consumers have over seafood. There's a lot of information out there in the media and on the web, but for a lot of consumers, I think it's more confusing than helpful. One of the things, popular trend is interest in sustainable seafood. If y'all would like to share your personal definition of sustainable seafood, what is that?
For me, it's seafood that, you know, reproduces and it's there for the next generation and for us to harvest every year. You know, it's kind of like a crop. If you don't, you know, protect your young, you don't go seeing people eat egg lobsters. If you scraped all your lobsters, you would, and took the eggs off them, you wouldn't have no lobsters. Something else that really bothers me sometimes is labeling, MSC labeling, eco-trust labeling, different labeling, and this is my perception and my own opinion, is people have to put out millions of dollars to get a label or a stamp because somebody wants to say it's a certain way it's harvested or something like that. Well, I know here in the U.S. We've got to where we have annual catch limits, and the best available science and management that I take part in has determined, which I wish they do more of, stock assessments, that this resource, here's what you're allowed to take out of it. So I believe that here in the U.S., you know, we shouldn't have to be paying different eco groups or NGOs exorbitant amounts of money to be able to say our product's sustainable. The reason why a lot of them do that is because that they want to be able to ship it overseas, where maybe the person, because it's got 3 letters on it, they feel better about it. But we've come a long ways, in our fishing. It's not catch all you want and fish 365 days a year. And so the sustainability part, as a fisherman, we're doing our part. I just wish the managers would catch up with what we see out on the ocean as far as the science to do a stock assessment. It's kind of like building a house. You need 10 sets of plans to build that house. Well, in fishery management, sometimes they say, you know what, it'd be nice if you had 10 sets, but we only have 2 sets of plans to build that house, where you're not getting a fully built house or fully pictured. So that's some of the difficulties. I know I'll get off the subject a little bit or things, but it's some of the difficulties we have when it comes to labeling, sustainability. We are fishing sustainable. And if there's not a resource out there, we don't have livelihoods and jobs, and people don't get a chance for the resource.
To clarify, are you saying that fisheries that have some labels certifying that they're sustainable have to pay for that? That's not independently done by the government?
Absolutely is what I'm saying. Anywhere from probably a minimal of $250,000 to probably $3 or $4 million. And through that, what they're buying is different things. Well, we put somebody to overlook your fishery. It's almost kind of like a extortion. And I have to be careful sometimes because I kind of speak my mind a little bit. And but I do good at it. I'm practice a little bit. But it's kind of like a little bit of like an extortion, because they're paying, for this labeling. And yes, some of the labeling's great, and if it helps somebody, go ask questions. Go, when Ryan talked about looking at some of the seafood watches out on the West Coast. Monterey Bay Aquarium's a great one. They don't want you to have a sea bass caught by a trawl boat, but it's all right to eat trawl boat flounder. Well, you know what? Somebody needs to tell them that trawl boat catches that flounder that has an annual catch limit right along with that sea bass. I look at stuff all the time that I see is out of date as heck, just because they haven't kept up with it. But yeah, it is. It's difficult. Ask questions. I'm a Googler, but be careful what you Google, because sometimes they can tell you wrong too. But ask questions, and that's the best. The most awareness I can say. Well, what's happening in your area? To give you a perspective of sustainability.
Anybody else want to address sustainable seafood?
Yeah. To me, sustainable really means domestic product. This goes along the line with what Dewey's saying. And that's what I try to preach to a lot of our customers is, look, just start with domestic product, because, NOAA fishery scientists were quoted earlier this summer as saying we have the best managed fisheries in the world, most regulated fisheries in the world. It's really going to be hard in the future for us not to have these fisheries unless something crazy happens. But it's under a microscope, and I just don't see us making the mistakes we made earlier in the century. Fisheries management has come a long way just in the last 50 years. On top of that, we're managing, sustainability is managing for continuity, which means that we have regulations and we have governing bodies in place to ensure that we're going to have these fisheries. We're consuming 90% of the seafood that we consume in the United States is imported seafood. So if we just start with the domestics and not get too messed up in the details, I think we'll be doing ourselves a huge favor. We're shipping all of our good stuff overseas and bringing all the secondary stuff to our country. So I think if we just start and preach domestic, it is sustainable, and that's just the fact of the matter. And this is coming from a guy who was a biologist in his former life, working with endangered species. So I feel very strongly about that.
And I agree with Ryan. We keep it local, and the local economy will benefit from that. But also, with all the imported seafood, there's not the regulations that we have here in the U.S. And there's a health issue here that I'm really concerned about as well. And some of the farm-raised fish and shrimps and stuff that come from outside of the United States are not raised in a very sustainable way or a very healthy way, and I'm concerned about us eating that and ingesting that. And so there's a health issue as well.
I'll back that note on that. I mean, I lived down in Ecuador for a winter, and I saw, this is before the government actually took over and put regulations on their shrimping industry. And I saw what their shrimping industry was doing to the coastline. They're literally, you know, you can't really knock the guy for doing it if he's trying to feed his family that lives on the coast. There's a grove of gum trees that don't do any good for them, so they cut them all down, dig a hole, throw some shrimp in there, and now they've got a shrimp farm. You know, and America was buying the world out of it because it was cheap, it was easy, it was fast. But now you've got Ecuador's coastline washing away because of it. They're cutting the gum trees down, and the root systems were what was holding the coastline together. So sustainable seafood is so much more than just regulating and paying attention to what you're catching, but also what it's doing to the ecosystem, like salmon farming. You know, I bring up the dark word salmon again, but you know, salmon farming in America for a long while there, it was the great new technique. Well, look what it was doing to the estuaries, because the salmon feces were settling down into the bay areas that they were cornering off to do these salmon farms, and now every other thing underneath the salmon died off because of the feces suffocating out all the algae, all the good stuff that cleans the water, the mussels, the oysters, the clams, everything. So there's so much more. There's so much to what sustainable seafood means. You know, and again, back to like Dewey said, personally, I've got to use a pretty solid filter because I can get in a lot of trouble real quick. But know what you're doing, know what you're buying, look into it, investigate, know what you're buying. Don't just say because it's the cheapest thing on the shelf, oh, that works for me. No, understand why it's the cheapest thing. It's because there's no regulations, there's nothing to it. It's a good reason it's cheap.
I tell you another aspect to think about, and we talk about regulations. If the amount of imported seafood that comes into this country had to meet or exceed the standards by which I'm held accountable and have to fish under, the imports would stop 75% tomorrow, if that would happen. So if our country, our politicians, elected officials, all them massive lobbyists with all that money poured in there would say, you know what? We want the same regulations on that imported seafood that we have placed, burdened, run out of business our U.S. commercial fishermen, then our imports would stop. And our country wouldn't have to eat the crap that comes in here. So that'd be one way, a simple way. Just do it just make the other fisheries that are coming in meet or exceed the standards by which I'm placed upon it. And you know, as I laugh a little bit because we got a ton of regulations placed, but we're producing that seafood, so we are sustainable. We're having to do the bycatch. You know, you hear about bycatch all the time. So mitigating for different things. Use a certain type of hook. You know, so we are the poster child for all this imported seafood that comes over here, but it doesn't happen in them other countries. But it happens here in the U.S. So we should be proud of the U.S. fishermen. We should be proud of what's being produced in our communities, what our chefs are producing and putting out there to the public. And we should be telling the other countries and placing restrictions on them. If you want my marketplace, then you have to abide by what our fishermen go through. That would be a best start right there. Best practice.
Okay, time for any questions from the audience. Oh, hands are going up. Sarah?
Go out of tweet mode. Whoever else is tweeting, thank you for keep going. All right.
I was wondering, why don't we already do that?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Probably the reason why is $1 competing against $100. And the public has not, you would think, as some of my favorite NGOs, as I say that laughingly, you would think instead of, we've ended overfishing in the U.S. So it's like, what's the next fight do they want to take on? Why not take on that? You would think that you would have all these people lined up saying, you know what, we demand it, but the public hasn't demanded it enough. And I wish that, our politicians would do the right things instead of worrying about how much money it takes to get it done.
Don't you think that's because the public isn't aware?
Well, yeah, I also believe that also. But, I don't put the best things in my body all the time sometimes when I'm eating something. But when I'm eating seafood, I'm going to ask or find out where it came from. But it should be our country's. It shouldn't be, every public that has to bring that to our countries. FDA, the importers, or not the importers because they want to make the money. But it should be up to our country, our regulators, to say, wait a second here. We got unlevel marketplace. Look at a few years ago when shrimp was flooding our markets and depressing the prices and everything else. And there was tariffs placed on imports of shrimp. So it takes a movement to rattle that cage, and I wish it could get rattled because I love to rattle the cage, especially for the right reasons. But it's tough, and I wish that would happen because that would be a great thing right there.
And so much also of that, the public doesn't. If so many people are not, if they're not pushed, they're not going to push the issue themselves. It's like they're waiting for someone else to do the pushing, and the government's not doing it. They're doing the best they can, which is more than really needs to be done in a lot of instances. But for the most part, the public is happy with saying, okay, well, it's on the shelf, so it must be okay. Well, it's not necessary. It's up to you to stand up and find out, learn, research, find out what you're buying, and then push the issue when you find something that is really unsatisfactory. As Dewey said, I mean, we're held at such high standards as a fishery in the United States. Why isn't the food that's coming into our grocery stores held at the same standard? It's not fair to our guys that are working so hard doing it. So it's up to everyone else to help push the movement forward.
The new program with National Geographic about the tuna fishers, do y'all have any pull in that? That would be a wonderful place to say just what you said tonight, to get it out to the public. Because I think the program is doing well.
Well, one problem I perceive, you got to realize that you're watching a reality TV show. And when you're watching reality TV, I expect there's more than one taped or more than one draft. So I would expect they're not going to allow you to say, I was asked about, I hate sound bites. And so I try to learn not to get sound bited because I've had it happen before. But that would be an excellent opportunity. But I doubt that the producers of that show would allow, I would love to have 5 minutes, but would allow just to talk. I wouldn't even fish. I'd sit on the dock. But just allow to tell that type of story. We don't that comes with access. And access takes money. But through programs and people who are passionate about our communities and seafood like this, I mean, I wish we could run before we had to crawl. But that's not the way it works. But that is one thing. If you place the restrictions on that imported seafood that I have to fish under. Right now they're working on IUU fisheries, which is unregulated, like pirate fisheries. Well, that ain't what's feeding America. That's some African country or Taiwanese or something doing something like that. That's not getting into the U.S. marketplace. But it's difficult. I would love 5 minutes on one of them tuna shows and I'd be nice with my language and just have opportunity to tell about the consumer and what we give to and stuff like that. But haven't got that chance yet. But we'll continue.
Maybe we can generate some letters to that thing from this group here.
That would be probably the number one, and for me, that would probably be sometimes my priorities changes in my thought process about management, but that would be one of the greatest. Is, if we have these restrictions on our U.S. fishermen, and they're producing food for us, and you're allowing imports that are like less than 0.5% tested or even looked at, well, crap, junk, come into our marketplace. Why are you doing that, politicians? Why are you doing that, FVA or whatever regulation agency there is? I'm not sure which one that is. So it would be great if, and don't do a form letter. Everybody write their thoughts. We should be demanding better of the food that's brought into our marketplaces. And I think that would be a great idea.
Well, you got one.
Good.
I'm Ann Simpson. I work with Ketch, and our mission is to work with the local catch groups like Outer Banks Catch and Carter Catch and North Dakota to educate consumers and expand that market. And Dewey, I love what you said. We could do a lot more to talk about imports and the effect of imports on the economy for North Carolina. But my question right now is for Seth. Seth, we have noticed that there are a lot of chefs up and down the coast that don't use North Carolina seafood, and inland too. So what are some of the messages that we could get across to chefs to get them to pay attention and start using more local seafood? You're doing it, and it's working for you apparently. So how do we get the other ones to sign on to do the same kind of thing?
Well, one of the things that frustrates me the most is people saying North Carolina seafood. When you go in there walking, you don't see a fish bin in there, much less ice on fresh fish. But you open that freezer up and you see all sorts from Ecuador and China, but they're promoting North Carolina, advertising North Carolina seafood, and not just they're doing it because it's cheaper and it's easier. They don't have to do what I do every day, which is calling my fishmongers and talking to them and seeing what they get. They don't have to sit and price out and find where they can get what they're looking for. I mean, like I ran out of crab cakes last night because I couldn't get domestic local. I'm not using crap from China. It just ain't happening. To me, it comes down to a laziness problem. If you're not willing to do your job, then don't do it. And definitely don't promote saying you use North Carolina seafood when you don't. It's not that difficult. It just takes doing your job properly. And price is a big issue with it, yes. But if you source your seafood properly, you get your connections set up, and you take care of your local fishermen, and they know that, hey, I'm coming in, I only have 10 pounds of tile fish. I know I can call Seth, and he's going to buy 10 pounds because it's not on the menu, but he's going to put it on special, and we're going to bring it in and get rid of it. I'm not saying I have to have 50 pounds of flounder every other day. I have to have this, I have to have that. No, I have to have what's coming off your boat whatever day you come into dock. Simple, make it easy for the fishermen. Their lives are hard enough as is. Design your restaurant so that you can sustain them, so that they can sustain their families and our economy. It's a matter of work. Again, I've got to watch what I say. I use my filter a little bit. But laziness is a large factor in the matter, for lack of better words.
Seth, we need to know your favorite seafood.
Again, splitting hairs. If I was on my deathbed, I think I'd want some soft shell crabs and a Krispy Kreme donut. Only when the light's on, though.
Seth, sorry to be picking on you, Jack Dick and Sea Grant, and it seems like we're working in a kind of a niche market with our locally caught seafood and chefs, and the question of why isn't everybody doing it? Is it do you make more money doing it? If so, it seems like they would be doing it. Or is it kind of a supply-demand squeeze that there really isn't enough local fresh to go around? I'm pretty ignorant about this, so I was just...
I'm sorry, we actually make less money selling local because I could get China product cheaper. I could get Ecuador cheaper. I could get Mexico cheaper. But I'd much rather see writing a check with a captain's name on it rather than writing a check to Cisco. You know, so we make less money. You know, I don't hit the profit margin that I would like to hit, but that's something that I'm willing to do as a restaurateur because it's more important to me for these men to be able to go out and fish, put gas in the boat, you put bait on the boat, make sure the lines are good, make sure they got the hooks to catch the fish. There's so much that goes in, there's so much that is involved with commercial fishing that people don't realize. It's not just driving out on Ramp 34 and throwing a line in the water with a piece of shrimp on the end. There's a lot to it. So, no, it is. You don't make as much money selling local, unfortunately, but it's because of what our government's done to our economy. You know, there's nothing we can do but keep doing what we believe in, and that is sell local. That's where I stand with it, and I will not bend on it. You know, and I'm not going to. At the same point, I'm not going to charge somebody $32 for a plate of food that they can go. You know, they're used to spending $24, $25 where they're from in Ohio or wherever it may be. But at the same point, I've got to meet it halfway in the middle, so they are seeing true local seafood, and they're also not walking away saying, "Man, we can't go out tomorrow night now."
But you know what? It's the best.
You're damn right about it.
So if you want the best seafood, it costs money.
Exactly. You get
all the way down, but it's the best, and it's produced by Americans, and it's giving you access to that resource. So to me, that's, you know, like Seth said, adding on to it, that's a home run right there.
Yeah. And that's the thing with my food is I don't have to do much to it. People are, you know, they write all the time about how great the food was and whatnot. It's like, I really didn't do that much to it. I just bought good food. You know, I bought it from good fishermen.
So are you finding any price resistance? Are people willing to pay more for better seafood in the restaurants now?
With education, yes. Within the last couple of years, we're starting to see a little bit more turn on it, that people are realizing, hey, they've now eaten at our restaurant 4 years ago and said, oh, that was expensive. Now they've eaten at a couple other restaurants. Well, they're back in our door now because they realize it's worth a couple extra dollars. Like Dewey said, you're buying the best. It's not only the best seafood you can buy, but it's everything American. It's staying in our economy. It's taking care of each other. I mean, it's one thing that so many people have turned their backs on these days. It's, hey, let's take care of each other and we'll all be a better community because of it. Quit worrying about what everyone else is doing. Let's take care of each other. And if that means having us pay $2 more a plate, we'll pay $2 more a plate because you're going to be making more money down the road also. You know, it's a leverage thing. It's a balance.
And can I add to that? One of the things is with local seafood, making the efforts that they do to bring great seafood inside to the interior of North Carolina, you know, up to Raleigh, and it's a 40-minute drive for me to go to the farmers market where they are located, but we do it because we want to go get their seafood when we're not at the coast or we don't have it available for us. And I would like to help empower other consumers and by giving them the knowledge or giving them the fire in their belly to go get local seafood. And I just don't understand it, and to let the usual household food buyer know that don't be afraid to buy good seafood because you can't mess it up. You can't, like you said, you don't have to serve a fancy sauce on it. You know, you said all, and I agree with you. You know, pure, unadulterated, great seafood, and it's there, and it's here in North Carolina. Let's do it. And there's just so much of stuff when you're talking about going on Google and trying to find out about regulations and about what's sustainable and what's the definition of that and what's good and what are the real regulations and are they pulling the wool over our eyes or is this really, really good? It is just a mess out there, and it's really hard for me even looking at it from a professional standpoint doing research. What is that definition of sustainable and how do you, you know, but anyway, I think we, as a consumer, people like myself and other diners need to be empowered with some great, just plain knowledge that We've got local treasures here, and it's worth paying more in a restaurant. It's worth more going to a market or to buying from local seafood to get the real stuff, not the other junk that's out there. And how do we empower other consumers to do that, and other people? How do we make them care? How do we make them know what's healthy and what's really economical? Because it's really more economical to buy more expensive seafood and eat more expensive seafood than it is to go to the doctor and deal with the health problems that
Right.
not eating
Yeah,
right gives it. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So.
That's a good point.
Dewey, I have a question. For many years, I was a national fisherman keeping up on the different laws. Do you see any positive relationships happening between the commercial fishermen and the state and federal regulating authorities?
It's difficult. And when I say difficult is because you have in certain aspects you have a fight between allocation, between user groups. One is an industry that's fishing for fun. The other industry is providing access for the fish. And so with the two state and something else, some of the stuff that happens at the federal level would not happen at the state level. It seems like with the feds, and particularly in some of the things I'm involved with my fisheries, they're just unaccountable. So it's difficult. I hope that answered your question. But it's up to our elected officials. In federal issues, there's our congressmen and senators, and it's up to them to oversee or keep in line the NOAA, National Marine Fisheries Service. But it would be amazing if all of us here tonight wrote a letter to our state representative and federal asking about why are you allowing 90% of the imports to come into this country unregulated, and look what we do to our commercial fishermen here in the U.S. Another quick thing is when we talk about taste of foods and different things, I travel around the country. I don't get a chance to do as much as I used to about a day in the life of a fisherman, and it's a program called Provider Pals. And I was out in Libby, Montana, and for 2 or 3 years, they heard me talk about fishing and showing them fish. And so I got a chance to cook for them one night. I carried some mahi-mahi, some soft crabs, some shrimp, and scallops. All were fresh cooked. And this old, one of these miner guys who worked in a mine, he said, Dewey, the best thing about this seafood? I haven't had to use no cocktail, tartar, or ketchup to eat it. And so, if we can get people just to taste that seafood one time, it's kind of like chumming up them mahi behind your boat if you're mahi fishing or dolphin. You get them to taste it, they're going to want it and want to eat it. And we want a resource out there to provide it to the public. And so that's the important thing. But, if you taste it, you want it. And it's amazing when you ask about the soft crabs are good, but a piece of fried sea mullet is probably pretty good too, So, and I like Krispy Kreme donuts also.
I'll share.
So speaking of food, you got me thinking of Miss Vicky's seafood back here. So it drives me to a question to Ryan. Not many people, when you say your favorite seafood, do they say clams? But I love clams too. So I'd love you to tell us, not something fancy, but the simple way you like to fix clams. First question, and this might be for Seth or Elizabeth. What do you think of freezing clams in a shell?
Yeah, clams is it's one of the few items we catch locally that is available just about every day, and there's a lot of them being caught, and they can't give them away, and they taste wonderful. We try to get people on them and they're not going to break the bank either, and they're healthy for you. They're really good for you. So my wife and I, we take a little Dutch oven, we put a quarter cup of white wine, a half cup of water, and a little bit of Old Bay or whatever your favorite seasoning is, and bring that to a boil. and then stick your clams in there. It's usually about 40 or 50 fit in there, and then put the timer on. I think bring the heat down. You put the timer on for 10 or 12 minutes. She always has to remind me. And you pull it off and it's done, and you just eat. I mean, we save the broth and make Bloody Marys out of it. We stew potatoes in the broth. That's the best potatoes you ever eaten. But we love those things. They're really good. Yeah.
I like to drink half a beer and pour the other half over the clams and steam it out. It's simple.
What about freezing? Question about freezing.
I have never done it myself, but I have friends who live on the coast and they do it all the time, and they said it makes it easier to get the clam out of the shell if you need to do it that way. Yeah. But when we have clams, we have to count how many each one gets, and everybody has to be accurate.
I'm the same way with freezing. I order accordingly to how many I need, but when you start to get chowder clams and whatnot, I'll freeze those just so you can pop them and get them out and actually chop them up to make chowder with. But for the most part, they still need to be sucking water.
Cape Hatteras Secondary School of Coastal Studies has a new foods program going, and the teacher is really determined to try to get local seafood into that cafeteria before she dies. I'm wondering, one of the species that is prevalent most of the time here is Cape shark. Is that feasible, you think, to try and introduce that into the school? And do any of you know anyone else who's doing that into the schools?
It's absolutely feasible. Being that Cape shark is caught year-round here, most people catch it and get mad that that's what they call it, but it's a fun fight, first off, if you're a recreational fisherman. Second off, it's back to the sustainable seafood. It's 100% sustainable. I mean, they are so prevalent here year-round. It's a very lean, healthy fish. They're sent up north most of the time for dog food and for fish sticks. How about if North Carolina would realize how sustainable that seafood is and put some money into an industrial area that they could use for cleaning the fish and producing it, you could very easily make a viable seafood product, North Carolina based, again, money going back into our economy and into our school system with healthy food. And it doesn't have to be deep fried like everyone thinks is a fish stick. There's multiple ways. It's fish. You can cook it any way you want.
North Carolina has access to, or our quota is about 14% of the allocation. So right now we're up to 8 million pounds of the quota we get. And I think last year we harvest between 5 and 6 million, or 5 million, something like that, I believe. And the rate of return to the boat ex vessel was like 10 cents a pound. I feel like that, I know I would, that if there was projects where somebody wanted to attempt to do something, I would be more than willing to donate. I know a lot of fishermen was, because I don't even fish for them. But they have been valuable in times for me. But up and down the coast where small boats all the way, to the lower part of our coast, all the way up to Oregon Inlet, boats that have made a living and have fished, but it's a sustainable resource. We up to 8 million pounds, and if also you have Virginia, and they have about they probably got about a 6 million pound quota. So if there was somewhere in North Carolina, we could have access to about 14 million pounds of fish there, processing or potential. But last year I tried it for the first time. Got the guys at the fish house to fillet it up for me. I took it home. I soaked it in some milk, like I most time do with a few things, and then I put some blackening seasoning on there, and my buddies, and I tried it. I didn't tell them what it was at first, and they're like, man, this don't have no fishy taste or nothing. This is pretty good. We fried some, we blackened some, we did a few different ways. But something good about the chefs and Seth is people that are willing to try something for us or promote something out there. It don't have to be a $10 a pound piece of yellowfin tuna or something. And so as you see annual catch limits, and you see the marketplace for seafood sometimes being absorbed in different areas, this would be a prime example. Another thing is smooth dog sharks. You have the smooth and the Cape shark spiny, and in North Carolina we produce about maybe a little over 1 million pounds of which is a real white meat shark that's available probably from about November to April. Smooth dog. So you got two different types of sharks. You know, first of all, people tend to think, well, sharks, I ain't eating no sharks. Well, you know, if you didn't put it on the menu, I had an opportunity a couple years ago to go do a taste testing and speak at a white tablecloth dinner that Ryan and Lynn invited me to in Raleigh. And we had everything from fried swordfish belly to farm-raised North Carolina striped bass, which was good. And the best thing that they liked the best, it seemed like everybody, you know, was the smooth dogfish that had a sauce on it. And it was like, man, I mean, it was great, you know. But it's getting the chefs to be able to try, that are not scared to try it. Which is, and Ryan and Lynn have done an awesome job with that, and Seth, and the article that they had in the magazine, I saw a great layout picture and all that. You know, so don't look at the picture, just try to, you know, look at monkfish. If you looked at a monkfish, you're like, I ain't eating that you know, that thing, but yet it's good. So I think spiny dogfish and smooth dogfish were just two things that North Carolina's got a good quota. They're sustainable. All the other catchphrases, if you need to throw that in there that I'm not sure of right yet, but would be a good place to start.
Can we get you to go to the school administration and see if you can talk that into it?
I'm not very, yeah, I'll go give my 2 cents worth and tell them here's the product. It's you got to have the mothers. It appears to be always the one that rattled the cage at the Board of Education and can help do that. Maybe the greatest.
I'll go with you and cook it.
So there you go. See, we have a chance right there.
I've lived here long enough that I remember when I first moved here, the cafeteria head at the school in Buxton, Miss Rachel Austin, she used to buy local fish. I guess centralization and consolidation, but you know, she used to order local fish from the harbor.
Lynn, another thing I was going to add about dogfish is it's a great fish for kids because it's boneless. It can be cut fairly easily. It's boneless, skinless, white fish. I've done taste tests at farmers markets with folks, didn't tell them what it was. They all thought it was cod or haddock, even though I'm a local guy. That's what they thought I was serving. But yeah, it's a great. I have mothers that come and get it when we have it just for their kids. So yeah. Mm-hmm.